This step must be executed with great care. If we let too much or not enough space for enamel, we'll not end up with a good aesthetic result. We'll perform exactly the same for the next two cavities, class 3 cavities. Since they are relatively small restorations, we must work with relatively small instruments and also the micro brush to adapt the material perfectly to the cavity margins. The use of magnifying lenses is extremely useful for performing this type of restoration. Each layer is light cured separately for 40 seconds while we apply dentin. We must be sure that we maintain the space in between the two teeth for further application of the matrix. We'll apply a small amount of effect material, which is an intensive white color, to mimic the enamel hypocalcifications, which are relatively visible when teeth get dehydrated. This will enhance the natural appearance of the restoration. A pre-shaped matrix is applied to help developing a nice and natural proximal profile. The matrix is stabilized, of course, with interdental wedges. Soft wedges are more practical because they can be bended on one side or the other whenever needed. Since we follow the natural layering concept, the next increment is logically enamel. We try to shape the material as well as we can with our hand instruments, and also with the use of the matrix. We only use two basic layers to restore anterior teeth: dentin and enamel, with possibly some effect materials, what you have seen in the previous sequence. We hold the matrix with the plier, and also we push at the same time the matrix against the neighboring tooth in order to get a good proximal contact. We let the composite flowing over the cavity margins before we light cure this layer for 10 seconds. We often need to add some more increments to complete the shape of the tooth. Go on with the surface of the mesial cavity. The wedge has been moved to the mesial interproximal space. We push the material towards the lingual margins so that we can cover the whole dentin and close the margins, buccal and lingual, in one single step. We had to add some more material to cover the lingual margin of the distal preparation, and we hold the matrix before light curing this additional increment. You see now the completed restorations on tooth number 12. The matrix has been applied around the tooth 11 before the application of the final layer on that tooth, following exactly the same technique and procedures which you have seen on the previous tooth. We shape the material with our hand instruments on the buccal, on the lingual proximal, and then we push the matrix back against the tooth before light curing the material. We have completed the filling of the 3 proximal cavities on tooth number 12 and 11, and we can start with the polishing. This is the last but a very important step, because we need to shape the restorations and give them a correct micromorphology on the surface. The first instruments which we use are discs for the proximal contours and the buccal curvature, followed by fine diamond burrs for minor corrections of the margins, interproximal spaces or cervical margins where disc cannot be used. We walk with us water spray so that we can keep control of our instruments, either on the margins or whenever developing fine anatomical details. This might not be possible with the water spray. We still smooth the proximal margins with a finishing strip before applying some bonding resin all over the margins to fill existing micro bubbles or defects. A last finishing of interdental spaces is performed before the polishing of the restoration surfaces with fine and extra fine discs. The last steps before removing the rubber dam is the adjustment of the lingual restoration anatomy. The